1. The following story was written by the same author of the creepy teacher story in my recent subscriber video. This incident was the one which was alluded to in that story. Before this actual story begins, here's some backstory. I know a lot of you don't like backstories, or they're boring, but trust me, this is necessary to understand the story. When I was 11, in the 6th grade, I met this guy. Let's call him Nick, just for the sake of his identity. Right away, I got bad vibes about this guy, but I didn't know why. He was in my math class, and I did not want to be around him. He was just that one guy at school that everyone stays away from. My friend, let's call her Lacey, who I've known since kindergarten, was hanging out with Nick. Little by little, throughout the 6th and 7th grades, I got used to having this guy around. We started talking, just about the little things, about life. These conversations lasted a year or so. Part 1. My story. There was this other girl who I didn't talk to much, for she was shy, and really did not want anything to do with me. That was alright. She plays a big role in this story later, so she also needs a pen name. How about Amber? Why not? Anyways, this is where the real story begins. 2 years after I meet Nick, I was 13 and in the 8th grade. I was in those awkward years where no one knew what the hell to do with clothing choice, hairstyles, all that crazy shit. Nick, however, hadn't changed at all since the 6th grade. Moving on, we hadn't talked at all through the beginning of the year up until that October. One day, Lacey invited him to sit with us because why not? During that time, however, he had gotten creepier to me, even though we became decent friends. I know what you're thinking. You're such an idiot. Why didn't alarm bells ring loudly in your head? Well, keeping in mind we were in middle school, so I didn't see him as much of a threat. I really should have, though. Nick sat with us that day, and I really did not want to sit next to him. But of course, since the so-called friends I had were such dickheads, they gave me no choice. He would only talk to me and not Lacey, even though they knew each other better, and she was right on the other side of him. Red flags raised already when he asked the very first question.
So what do you look for in a guy?
What? We are young students, innocent, a lot of us, and you dare ask what I look for in someone? No. By this time, I had just figured out what my sexuality was, not thinking of what he asked. At that point, we were dismissed to get food, so I quickly got up and stood in the longest line there was at the time. Then I got my food. Well, shit. Back to the pedo table, I guess. Oh, and this was a school where if you sat down somewhere, you stay there for the whole lunch period. I sat back down, next to this weirdo, not even answering his first question. Without hesitation or warning, he started telling me what he looked for in a girl. I sat there, confused as hell to what was going on, and not even wanting to eat my food at this point.
I really like small butts and small boobs because they're easier to look at.
The fuck? At this point, my face went completely pale. I was paralyzed with fear, all because those were attributes that I contained at the time. At this point, I was scared, but I had nowhere to go. He continued talking, though, each phrase getting more and more unnerving.
You never answered my question, though. What do you look for in a guy? Big dick, small dick, tall, short? I want to know.
Me? I said nothing. In my mind, I was screaming, "Go tell the dean, go tell the fucking dean." I didn't do it, though, because I'm a dumbass and can't talk to people of authority. I murmured something along the lines of, "I really don't care what a guy has, just their personality or something. I don't know." I felt myself getting smaller and smaller, more and more out of my own head, as I was afraid of what he was going to say next. Boy, I was damn right for sure, though. He then said something that I will never let myself live down.
My dick is 9 inches long, flaccid. I almost broke my neck trying to deep throat it.
I'm not kidding. This is what he actually said to me. He didn't say it just to me, though, but we'll talk about that later. It was at this point where I realized he'd been giving me the full up and down stairs for the past 5 minutes. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I stood there, nervous as fuck, until lunch was over. That was the last time I talked to him alone. Part 2. Amber's story. Amber and I met about a month after the lunch incident. We quickly became amazing friends, but I didn't know that she was actually dating the psychopath known as Nick. Everything between her and I was amazing until I heard about the incident, where Nick asked some girl for nudes. That's when I knew he was as fucked up as I thought he was. I lasted a couple of weeks, not knowing who the victim was. Not until one frosty December day, where I casually mentioned the incident to Amber. Did you hear that Nick asked some girl for nudes? And that he has to live the rest of his life as a registered sex offender? Personally, I don't think he was forced to register as a sex offender, because our school handled things like that very, very poorly. Her face became white as a sheet as she told me who the victim was. Ellie, she said. At this point, she was in a soft whisper, seeming really nervous. That person he asked for nudes from was me. He asked me for nudes, he harassed me, and I was brainwashed. He hypnotized me to like him just so he could use me for his sexual pleasures. I almost threw up because he tried doing that exact same thing to me in 6th and 7th grades. What's frightening is it almost worked. A few days after she told me this, she told me the backstory at lunch. We started dating in October. I admit, I liked him at the time. I thought he had a good personality and was cute. I was brainwashed to like this sick creep who happens to laugh at the sight of drowning children, porn, and anything that causes pain. He started acting like a pedophile about 3 weeks after dating. At that point, I was comfortable with being around him, and he noticed. He told me his dick size, my flaws he didn't enjoy, and he asked me for nudes. I reported him to the dean the very next day. He wasn't suspended or expelled, if you couldn't tell. He's in our freaking English class. They told me they were going to move him out of our English class. Not only did they not do that, the teacher, let's call her Mrs. Lever, still doesn't even know that I basically have an in-school restraining order against him. Every time we sat at lunch for the next 2 months, Nick would find us and just stare angrily at us the entire time. We never told anyone, since we knew they wouldn't do anything, since Nick didn't get any punishment for sexually assaulting a kid and harassing others. Unfortunately, he hasn't stopped harassing unsuspecting girls and staring us down at lunch. Today is July 19th, 2016, only about 8 months after this incident. Nick never left our class, and Amber and I are not allowed to speak to him or even be near him, even though we are all going to separate high schools. We read The Giver in class, and he laughed whenever someone was released. He is a really fucked up individual, and I'm so glad that I'm not going to the same high school as him. Amber and I are still very good friends, and a lot of shit has happened since that incident. Please be aware of who you're hanging out with. You never know who you'll get as a friend. 2. So one summer evening of last year, I lived in a town right outside of San Fernando Valley. I'm walking to 7-Eleven to get a big gulp and a hot dog. But being 15, I don't have a car, so I walk everywhere. I'm about to walk in the store and there's a homeless man asking for change. I'm used to this sort of thing happening, but this guy was different. He had a almost predator look, and I was almost positive he was on something. But I declined, saying I don't have any change. Normally I would give him a couple of dollars, but I don't for the ones who are clearly on drugs, so I walk in this store, get my things, and walk out. But as I'm getting my things in the store, I notice him watching me through the glass window. It came off a little weird, but I shrugged it off. As I walk out the 7-Eleven, he starts yelling at me. I did have change, and calling me names. So I ignored him. The walk back to my house was about 8 to 9 blocks away, and I looked back after I put some distance between us. He wasn't there. I was happy that he stopped, but I still decided to take the bus, so I would get to my house quicker. As I'm waiting for the bus, I see him across the street, staring at me now. I'm confused and a little creeped out on how he got there so quickly. So I decided to walk a block in either direction. This is when it starts to get worse. He starts following me. He ran across the street, and he starts yelling phrases like asshole, motherfucker. And I'm one to have a short temper, but I know it was stupid now that I look back. But I turn around and say, shut the fuck up, and he got pissed. This is where I get scared for my life. He pulls out a big bowie knife and starts fast walking towards me. I drop my soda and hot dog and sprint. Wouldn't you know, so does he. As I turn down another road, I sprint for about half a mile and end up in a nicer neighborhood. I look behind me and he's not there. So I call my friend and tell him I needed to be picked up. And where, since my mom was at work. About 10 minutes later, my friend and his mom picked me up. And they said, "Did you see what happened?" And I replied with no. And they said the police were looking for someone around this place, and asked if I saw anything, and I told them this story. They said I could stay the night at their house, since my mom works the night shift. I replied with, alright, sure. And as we're driving back, I see the homeless guy sitting at the 7-Eleven, asking for more change. Sometimes I think on how I could have avoided that whole situation, and I'd just given him $1. So, creepy homeless dude, let's not meet again. 3. The following story contains themes of child molestation. If you're upset by this, you may wish to skip to the next story. This isn't an extraordinary story, but it is a true one. To the best of my memory, it was the late 80s, on a hot Sunday day in Toronto, Canada. I was about 12 years old. My friends and I were playing baseball at our public school, Baseball Diamond, which was on a relatively busy street. Just for reference, this school has since been demolished, and a new school building was built right over the said Baseball Diamond. New building, same name. Also, interesting fact, the old school building also happens to be the location where the country singer, Michelle Wright, did her music video for All You Really Want to Do in 1991. Now back to the story. A black man in his 40s showed up and sat on the bench right beside the Baseball Diamond. Under the hot sun, no hat, nor any other kind of shade. We thought this was a little odd, but we just kept playing. He was watching us and shouted some comments pertaining to baseball here and there. I suppose he was bored and had nothing better to do. Let's call him Man 1. The Baseball Diamond was right beside a busy street, which has its share of poor people, middle-class people, drug addicts, drug dealers, prostitutes. Not the good-looking, expensive type, but the crackhead type. And other weirdos. So needless to say, we were used to this. However, as the man kept shouting his uninvited baseball comments, it began to irritate me, so at this point, I qualified him as creepy. To my relief, he walked away. Eventually, it was my turn to pitch. Just then, another man showed up. He was white, and also in his 40s. Let's call him Man 2. Man 2 also had some comments on the baseball game, but was more aggressive in his baseball advice. Eventually, he came closer and closer until he stepped up to me and started giving me pitching advice. I thought it was strange that he had to give me advice for underhand pitching. But as a naive young boy, I had the habit of respecting and obeying adults by default. Then he started getting right up against my back and started holding my wrist to show me how to pitch. You know how you see in movies how guys put moves on girls under the guise of teaching them something. like throwing a ball or swinging a golf club. Yeah, he was doing that, and now that I think back on it, he was right up against my body. So it was quite inappropriate to say the least. Well, at this point, I was very uncomfortable. And what made it worse was that I could smell alcohol on him. He was touching me inappropriately in front of all my friends in broad daylight, and I didn't know what to do. I don't know what my friends were thinking, but I remember it being very quiet. I suppose they were in a bit of shock. Not as much as I was, though. I think it's this thing that kids have to please people, especially adults. It reminds me of that movie, The Lovely Bones, where the predator uses kids' respect for adults against them, manipulating them. As he states several times, be polite. So, when I finally overcame my initial shock, I backed away. Just then I heard Man 1 shouting some obscenities to Man 2. Yep, Man 1 had returned. He came at him and started shoving him. Man number 2 started to back away, cursing back. Man 1, still scolding and cursing him, did some sort of jump kick to his back and sent him tumbling forward. This continued as they moved right out of the schoolyard. We watched them for a few minutes until Man 2 disappeared. Man 1 returned, looking angry, and shouted a few things to us, but, to be honest, I was still in shock and didn't understand what he said. He finally just walked away, for good this time. Upon reflection, even though I was a little scrapper kid, for years thinking back on it, I felt foolish, violated, and ashamed for letting someone put his hands on me like that. However, I'll always be grateful for that stranger man, Man number 1, whom had nothing better to do that day than to sit in the sun, shouting uninvited baseball comments, and then beat up and chase away a sexual predator that preyed on a child. Whomever you are, I thank you. One more thing, to everyone. Please let the kids know that they aren't obligated to please or be polite to anyone that makes them feel uncomfortable in any way. They don't owe them anything. Encourage them to be strong and to stand up for themselves. 4. My name is Sam. I am a 21-year-old, 5'7" female and a security guard. I live in Fresno, California, which I'm sure you heard has a high freaking crime rate. There's not a night I work that I don't hear police sirens. Anyway, I have 4 sites that I patrol throughout my 8-hour shift, and only have to do 16 checks, 4 at each site, with 5 tags at each site that I have to scan. So my night is pretty boring, except for the occasional dumpster divers I have to kick out, or the apartment visits I have to do because some drunk idiots are being too loud. I have had some experiences here that have unsettled me, but this one just scared the hell out of me. There's this one site I used to check at around 3 in the morning. It's called Eliana. I've always gotten a creepy vibe from it while doing my patrols. It's just a really eerie place. I found myself getting goosebumps and feelings of being watched, especially when I go to the back where there's a huge tree that the complex absolutely refuses to trim, so it's basically just a big black corner. I always keep my hand on my knife out of fear that something's about to jump out of that tree and attack me. So, it was a few days ago that I decided I'd do the 2 back tags at this place in my vehicle and get the other 3 in the front by foot. I was doing my regular drive around, which is clockwise around the complex. And when I made my last right turn, now facing the complex entrance, I saw what I think was a guy, probably about 6'2", wearing beat-up Converse, grey sweats, and a hoodie that had the hood pulled up and tied with his hands in the front pockets. I didn't really freak out at first. I thought, great, another transient I have to kick out, until I started getting closer and noticed his head was bobbing, and he was staggering a little, just not moving normal as he made his way to the front gate. Usually we have to radio it in if we have someone intoxicated on our property, but since it looked like he was leaving, I didn't bother. At this time, I'm on the phone with my husband via Bluetooth, telling him about this guy, but stomp on the brakes because when I was about 10 feet away from the guy, he stops moving right and immediately goes left towards the little space between the dumpster and the garage. But he did it in kind of a grapevine motion, so I didn't see his face. Here's the freaky part. It takes about 5 seconds to make it to the space from where he was at, and the way he was walking, he couldn't have made it out of my sight in time, since I was right on the corner of the garage and only had to pull forward 2 feet to see into the space, but literally the second I closed that little gap to tell him he needed to get the hell out, I didn't see him anymore. I got out of my patrol car, knife and flashlight in hand. This guy was gone, and I mean gone. There were no flowers broken, no footprints in the mud, and none of the bushes were moving. Also, there is a solid wall right behind the bush, so the only way he could have gone was up. But even so, I still would have seen him jumping over because the fence is spiked, and it's like 8 feet high, but there was no indication whatsoever that this guy went through there. I ran back to my car and called dispatch, telling them about the man and what happened, and there's no way in hell I was doing this patrol without someone coming to help me check the site. So they tell me to sit put in my car, and as soon as my sergeant is pulling in, I feel safer simply for the fact that he's a muscle-bound 6-foot-something guy with a deep-ass voice and hands the size of my head. I got out of my car, and we did the foot patrol trying to find this guy, and came up with nothing. I changed my patrol timing after that, to 5 in the morning when the sun starts coming up, but I ended up posting my experience on Facebook, and my friend Bridget said I should see if anyone died there, just for shits and giggles. I humoured her, but I found that in 2010, there were 3 people killed in those apartments. It was a murder-suicide according to police. I haven't changed patrol beats yet, but I honestly believe at least one of the ghosts was watching me. Additional. Yesterday morning at around 3 a.m, while I was doing my patrol, I decided I was just sleep deprived and was going to face my fears of walking around the complex. But when I was getting closer to the spot that I saw the guy, I started hearing footsteps behind me, and I swear I nearly threw up my lunch because when I turned around, the guy that I saw was there. But he was facing sideways, still wearing the same clothes, and I couldn't see his face. He took a few steps forward to the side wall by the garages and went out slightly behind them. And as much as I wanted to run, my curiosity got the better of me. As I walked, I really wasn't expecting to see him or it there. But when I turned the corner, he was still there. Not standing, but crouched down, facing the wall. And he was whispering something really low and fast. But what I could make out was, "Better run before he comes." Over and over. I took off like a bat out of hell, and I swear my heart was about to burst out of my chest. But I got in my patrol car and drove it back to where my personal car was parked, and called dispatch after I calmed down, to tell them I needed to go home. I'm now taking the rest of the week off. When I get back, I plan to put in my 2 weeks' notice. I honestly don't know what the hell is at this site, but I'm done dealing with all this creepy crap. 5. A little backstory. I'm 5'9", live about 13 miles from the closest town, male, and 20. A bit about my property. It's a quarter of an acre long and wide, with tall stick-like plants that come up to about chest high in the back part of the property. We also have a take and a few sheds in the back. A take, for you that don't know, is a man-made fishing hole. In front of the sheds we keep the grass short and reasonably manageable. That way, it's easy for my grandmother to get to the sheds. Yes, I live with my grandmother while I am going to college. And sorry about all of that, it's important to the story. Well, one day at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, about a month or so ago, I saw this jet black figure running in the back half of my backyard through the tall grass. I didn't get a good look at it. All I saw was something that looked about 2 feet taller than the grass, running from the dry take behind the shed, about 10 or 20 feet away. It moved as if it was floating. That's the best way I can describe it. The thing just floated through this brush like it was nothing. And I watched the other side of the shed, thinking it was someone that just got lost and was looking for help, but they either hid behind the shed all day, which where I live would mean waiting in 90-degree heat, or it just disappeared. Honestly, this shook me up a bit. But I thought, well, maybe I was just seeing things, and went back to doing what I was doing. Then about a week after that, my dog, who only barks when he thinks I am taking too long to feed him, started barking at something. This freaked me out because, like I said, he only barks when he sees me with food. So I get up and look out the back door to see what he is barking at. Then I see this thing again, just floating through the backyard, the shape outlined by the sunset. Again, just moving from the lake to behind the shed. I thought about heading out there with my hatchet, but my dog just pushed his head against me, and I locked the back door and went to bed. The last sighting I had of it was about 3 days ago. This time it just stood by the shed, looking at the house before ducking behind the shed. It looked like a man, but with very long hair in its face. That's all. I got a good look at it, and it just freaked me out. I stopped going too far into my backyard without my hatchet, and I always keep an eye out. I hope this isn't too long, and if anything comes up, I'll let you know. I really just want to know what it is. I mean, I know it's not a Bigfoot. The hair was way longer than what people say Bigfoots should be. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Subscriber Stories, Episode 5. I'm very glad these subscriber stories have been received as well as they are. I really do like the idea that they're a mix of different types of stories, different genres of stories. It's kind of refreshing for me to do, and it's nice to see they're being fairly well received. Big thanks goes to the 5 people who shared their stories with me. Without you guys, I'd be struggling to think of something to do for Tuesday. I'd be rushing to get a glitch video together, which actually reminds me I've got one glitch story recorded. I'll need to find some others so I can maybe do one either this week or next week. Now, let me think, is there a plan for the week? Well, tomorrow will be True Scary Stories. I'm working on the glitch video, I'm working on a Tinder video, I've got bits and pieces done for both of them. I'm hoping to have something like that up for Thursday. And hopefully paranormal on Saturday. And right now I'm not No, paranormal on Friday. My apologies. And Saturday is kind of open at the moment. I would like to do a TIFU, but that's potluck is what that is. I'll have to see what I can get. You know how it goes. Okay, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.